My grandson showed me his secret sleeping place, a locked closet with just a blanket. Mommy says I'm too loud for a real bed. I saw scratch marks on the inside of the door. I called the police, and when they opened it fully, they found. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The morning I discovered my grandson's nightmare began like any other Tuesday. I'm Margaret Thompson, though most folks in Cedar Rapids know me as Mrs. T from Washington Elementary, where I taught third grade for 37 years. At 68, with silver hair I still pin up the same way I have since 1979, I thought I'd seen everything there was to see about children and their struggles. I was wrong. People say I have the kind of face that makes babies stop crying in grocery stores. My late husband Robert used to joke that I could spot a troubled child from 3 blocks away, like some kind of grandmother superhero. Maybe it was all those years in the classroom, learning to read the silent language of children who couldn't find the words to express their pain. Or maybe it was just the instinct that comes with raising 3 children of my own, watching them grow, make mistakes, and become parents themselves. Sarah was my middle child, my sensitive one. The girl who used to bring home injured butterflies in shoeboxes, convinced she could nurse them back to health with sugar water and love. When she called me 3 years ago, sobbing that her marriage was falling apart, I didn't hesitate. I sold the bonds Robert and I had saved for our Golden Years cruise to help her put a down payment on a modest house near me. What good was seeing the Greek islands if my daughter was drowning in debt and despair? The divorce nearly broke her. I watched my vibrant daughter transform into someone I barely recognized, working double shifts at the hospital and weekend hours at the clinic just to keep the lights on. That's when I stepped in as the regular babysitter. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd arrive at 7 sharp, my tote bag filled with homemade snacks, storybooks, and the kind of unconditional love only a grandmother can provide. Tommy was 6, the youngest of Sarah's 3 children. While Emma had her mother's stubborn streak and Jake inherited his father's athletic build, Tommy was different. He had these enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold entire universes of thought. He was quieter than his siblings, preferring to build elaborate Lego cities rather than play video games. The child had an imagination that could turn a cardboard box into a spaceship and a wooden spoon into a magic wand. I'd raised enough children and taught hundreds more to know that every child has their own language of love. Emma needed intellectual challenges and debate. Jake thrived on physical activity and competition. But Tommy? Tommy needed gentle consistency. He needed someone to sit still with him, to listen to his elaborate stories about the adventures of his stuffed dinosaur, Mr. Rex. He needed someone to notice when he arranged his goldfish crackers in perfect circles before eating them, one by one, counterclockwise. In my years of teaching, I'd learned that the quietest children often have the most to say. They just need someone patient enough to listen. Tommy would curl up against me during story time, his small fingers tracing the illustrations as I read. Sometimes he'd whisper questions that broke my heart with their innocence. "Grandma, do all mommies get angry? Why does Derek make mommy smile different than daddy did? Can wishes come true if you wish hard enough?" I should have paid more attention to those questions. I should have recognized the signs that my 37 years in education had taught me to spot. But sometimes, when it's your own family, love blinds you to the very truths you'd see clearly in strangers. Tuesday mornings had become my favorite part of the week. I'd wake up at 5:30, not because I needed that much time to get ready, but because the anticipation made me restless. Robert's side of the bed had been empty for 3 years now, but on Tuesday mornings, I barely noticed. I had somewhere important to be, someone who needed me. My morning ritual was precise and comforting. First, I'd pack Tommy's favorite snacks in my old teaching tote, the one with embroidered apples that Sarah had given me for my retirement, homemade peanut butter cookies shaped like dinosaurs, because store-bought never tasted quite right to him. Apple slices cut into stars with the cookie cutter he'd picked out at the dollar store. String cheese that I'd separate into the thinnest possible strands, because that's how he liked to eat it. One tiny piece at a time, making it last. The 20-minute drive to Sarah's house was my thinking time. I'd passed the elementary school where I'd taught, the park where Robert and I used to take our children, the church where we'd celebrated baptisms and mourned losses. Cedar Rapids had its problems like any city, but it was home. These streets held our entire family history, every triumph and heartbreak embedded in the familiar landscapes. Sarah's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a yard that needed mowing and gutters that needed cleaning. The kind of maintenance Robert would have handled without being asked. I'd pull into the driveway at exactly 6:50, giving Sarah 10 minutes before she had to leave for her shift at the hospital. Tommy would already be at the front window, his small face pressed against the glass, leaving those precious little handprints that Sarah complained about, but I secretly loved. The moment I'd open the door, he'd launch himself at my legs, wrapping his arms around my knees with a force that nearly knocked me over every time. "Grandma's here! Grandma's here!" he'd shout as if my arrival was the most miraculous event in the world. Sarah would emerge from the kitchen, usually with coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, already in her scrubs, already exhausted before the day truly began. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," she'd say. The same phrase every time, kissing my cheek as she grabbed her purse. "Emma and Jake already caught the bus. Tommy's had breakfast. There's leftover pasta in the fridge for lunch." Then she'd kneel down, smooth Tommy's hair, and tell him to be good for Grandma, though we both knew he always was. After Sarah left, Tommy and I would settle into our routine. First, we'd clean up breakfast dishes together, him standing on his little step stool, carefully drying each spoon with the concentration of a surgeon. Then we'd move to the living room for what he called adventure time. Sometimes we'd build elaborate pillow forts that transformed the couch into a castle. Other times, we'd spread out every single one of his toy dinosaurs and create elaborate prehistoric scenarios. He had names for each dinosaur, complete backstories about their families and fears and favorite foods. Mr. Rex, his stuffed T-Rex, was always the hero, protecting the smaller dinosaurs from vague dangers that Tommy never quite articulated. "The bad things can't get them when Mr. Rex is watching," he'd explain, making the stuffed animal patrol the perimeter of our imaginary world. Lunch was always an event. Tommy would help me set the table with the special dinosaur plates Sarah kept in the upper cabinet. He'd fold the napkins into triangles, insisting they looked like dinosaur mountains. We'd eat slowly, him telling me about his dreams from the night before, elaborate stories that seemed too complex for a 6-year-old mind. The afternoons were quieter. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on my lap while I read to him, his breathing becoming deep and even, his small hand clutching mine. In those moments, the house felt full of peace, the kind of contentment I'd thought I'd lost when Robert died. Tommy brought light back into my world, reminded me that love didn't end with loss, it just transformed into something different. The first crack in my perfect Tuesday appeared 3 weeks before everything shattered. Sarah was in the kitchen, rushing to gather her things for work, when she knocked over Tommy's orange juice. The glass didn't break, but the juice spread across the white tile floor like a small sunrise. It was such a minor thing, the kind of accident that happens in every household with children. "Tommy!" Sarah's voice shot up 2 octaves, sharp enough to cut glass. "Why did you leave your juice there? I told you to keep it in the middle of the table." I watched Tommy's entire body change. This child who'd been chattering about his dream featuring flying pandas suddenly shrunk into himself. His shoulders hunched forward, his eyes dropped to the floor, and his hands balled into tiny fists at his sides. But it was the flinch that stopped my heart. The way he jerked backward as if expecting a blow, even though Sarah was still 5 feet away grabbing paper towels. "I'm sorry, Mommy," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "I'll be better. I promise I'll be better." Sarah didn't seem to notice the fear in his voice. She was already mopping up the spill, muttering about being late, about how Derek would be annoyed if she wasn't ready for their lunch date. But I noticed. 37 years of watching children had taught me the difference between respect and fear, between caution and terror. Later that morning, as we built a zoo out of blocks, Tommy asked me a question that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Grandma, if I was really, really good all the time and never made any noise, could I come live with you when Mommy gets too tired? I tried to keep my voice steady, casual. What makes you think Mommy gets too tired, sweetheart? He carefully placed a block on top of our giraffe enclosure, his concentration intense. Derek says I make her tired. He says I'm exhausting. He pronounced the word carefully, like he'd practiced it. That means I use up all her energy, like when my tablet battery dies. The way he explained it, so matter-of-fact, made my stomach turn. You don't exhaust me, Tommy. You give me energy. You're my special sunshine. He smiled then, but it was fragile, like tissue paper in rain. Maybe I could be your sunshine all the time. I wouldn't need much room. I'm good at being small. That phrase haunted me through lunch. Good at being small. What 6-year-old boy should be good at being small? Tommy was supposed to be loud, messy, taking up space with his elaborate games and boundless energy. Instead, he moved through the house like he was trying not to disturb the air. When I helped him wash his hands after lunch, I noticed the bruising on his upper arm. 5 distinct marks, 4 fingers and a thumb, purple-green against his pale skin. My teaching instincts screamed, but my grandmother's heart whispered excuses. Children bruised easily. Maybe someone grabbed him too hard during play. Maybe Emma or Jake had been roughhousing. Tommy, what happened to your arm? I kept my voice light, conversational. He pulled his sleeve down quickly, tugging it over his small fingers. I bumped it. Where did you bump it? His eyes darted toward the hallway, then back to his hands. I don't remember. I bump into things sometimes when I'm not careful. Derek says I need to pay better attention. Derek, the boyfriend who'd appeared 6 months ago with his easy smile and construction job, the one who brought Sarah flowers every Friday and fixed the leaky faucet without being asked, the one who made Tommy go silent whenever his truck pulled into the driveway. That afternoon, I watched Tommy draw while I pretended to read my book. His pictures had changed recently. Where once he drew bright, suns and tall trees, now his crayon moved in dark circles, creating caves and boxes, small figures huddled in corners of the page, surrounded by thick black lines. What's this one? I asked, pointing to a tiny stick figure inside what looked like a rectangle. That's the quiet place, he said, adding another layer of black around the box, where loud boys go to learn to be good. That evening, I sat in my kitchen staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The logical part of my brain, the teacher who'd been trained to spot abuse, was screaming. But the mother in me, the part that had raised Sarah from a colicky infant to a compassionate nurse, was louder. This was Sarah we were talking about. My Sarah, who at age 7 had spent her entire allowance buying cat food for the strays behind the grocery store. The same girl who cried for 3 days when her goldfish died, insisting we hold a proper funeral with eulogies and hymns. She'd written a poem about how even the smallest lives deserve dignity and respect. That child couldn't have become someone who would hurt her own son. It was impossible. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent photos. There was Sarah at Tommy's birthday party 2 months ago, her arm around him, both of them laughing at the clown's balloon animals. She looked tired, yes, but she was smiling. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. Surely a mother who would hurt her child couldn't smile like that. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Robert always said I could find a conspiracy in a grocery list. Since his death, I'd been watching too many true crime documentaries, filling my empty evenings with stories of terrible people doing terrible things. My daughter Patricia had warned me about this just last week. Mom, you need to stop watching that stuff. You're starting to suspect everyone of something sinister. The bruises could be explained. Tommy was an active boy despite his quiet nature. Last month he'd fallen off the swing set and scraped both knees. Children were constantly collecting minor injuries. It was part of growing up. And that flinch? Maybe he was just startled. Sarah had been stressed lately, working those double shifts. Any parent might raise their voice over spilled juice when running late. As for Derek, well, I had to admit I didn't know him well. He seemed pleasant enough at family dinners, always complimenting my pot roast, always offering to help with dishes. He worked hard, had a steady job, and seemed to make Sarah happy. She deserved happiness after everything she'd been through with the divorce. Maybe I was just being an overprotective mother, suspicious of any man who came near my daughter after watching her heart break once before. The comment about living with me, that stung. But couldn't it be normal? Every grandchild probably fantasized about living with their grandparents at some point, especially grandparents who let them have cookies for breakfast occasionally and never yelled about muddy shoes. I was the fun grandmother, the one without rules about bedtime or vegetables. Of course, Tommy might prefer my house to one with structure and discipline. Modern parenting was different from my generation. We'd been raised on children should be seen and not heard, but we'd swung the pendulum too far the other way, creating a generation of entitled kids. Maybe Sarah and Derek were just trying to find a middle ground, establishing boundaries I was too soft to set. The quiet place Tommy drew could be a timeout corner, a perfectly reasonable consequence that my progressive teaching background made me question unnecessarily. I thought about calling Sarah, having a casual conversation about Tommy's behavior, but what would I say? I think you're hurting your son because he flinched and has a bruise? She'd be devastated that I could even think such a thing. Our relationship, already fragile from the stress of her divorce and financial struggles, might not survive that kind of accusation. By the time I went to bed, I'd convinced myself to wait and watch. Maybe keep a little notebook documenting anything unusual, just in case. But I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I wouldn't be the hysterical grandmother who cried wolf. Sarah needed my support, not my suspicion. And Tommy needed stability, not a grandmother stirring up trouble based on paranoid hunches. I'd give it another month, I decided. Christmas was coming. Maybe the holidays would ease everyone's stress, bring back the warmth that seemed to be seeping out of Sarah's house like heat through old windows. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving changed everything. Sarah had left earlier than usual for a mandatory staff meeting, and Derek had stayed overnight. I heard his truck start up and pull away just minutes after Sarah's car, leaving Tommy and me alone in the unusual quiet of the morning. "Grandma, want to see something?" Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper even though we were alone. He took my hand with both of his, tugging gently. "It's my secret, but secrets are okay to share with grandmas, right?" I followed him down the hallway, past the bathroom, past Emma's room with its "Keep Out" sign decorated with glittery skulls. He stopped at the linen closet and looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes. "This is my special room, the one where bad boys sleep." My blood turned to ice water. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He opened the closet door, and the smell hit me first. Stale air mixed with something sharp and shameful that I recognized from my teaching days. The smell of accidents that couldn't be helped when children were too frightened to ask for the bathroom. "When I'm too loud, or when I forget the rules, I sleep here," he explained, as casually as if showing me his toy collection. "Derek made it special for me. See, I have my blanket." It was a thin fleece throw, the kind you'd use for a picnic, crumpled in the corner on the floor. No pillow. The closet was maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, shelves on 3 sides filled with towels and sheets, leaving barely enough floor space for a small child to curl up. But it was the inside of the door that made me grab the door frame for support. Scratch marks, dozens of them, at Tommy's height, some deep enough to have pulled away paint and exposed raw wood underneath. Dark stains where small fingers had bled from trying to claw their way out. And a padlock latch on the outside, shiny and new, recently installed with precision that spoke of Derek's construction experience. "Sometimes I get scared in the dark," Tommy said, reaching up to touch the scratches almost lovingly like old friends. "But Derek says brave boys don't cry, so I try to be quiet. I'm getting better at it. Last time, Mommy said she didn't even hear me at all." I couldn't breathe. Sarah knew. My daughter knew her child was being locked in a closet, and she'd praised him for suffering in silence. Tommy pulled something from behind the towels on the lowest shelf, a small flashlight with dying batteries and a sleeve of saltine crackers. "I hide these for the really long nights. Derek doesn't know about them. You won't tell, will you?" "How many nights, Tommy?" My voice sounded strange, disconnected from my body. He counted on his fingers, concentrating hard. "Maybe 3 times every week, more when I'm extra bad, like when I cried because I missed Daddy, or when I laughed too loud at cartoons, or when I asked for a second juice box." I knelt down, my knees cracking against the hardwood, and pulled him against me. He smelled like baby shampoo and fear. "You're not bad, Tommy. You're perfect exactly as you are." "That's what Daddy used to say," he whispered into my shoulder. "But Derek says Daddy was wrong about lots of things." I held him tighter, feeling his small heart beating against mine like a trapped bird. "Show me what else, baby. Show Grandma everything." He led me to the garage where he'd hidden a pillow behind the lawnmower for when the closet floor gets too hard, and his teddy bear wrapped in a plastic bag so he doesn't smell like the closet. Each revelation was delivered matter-of-factly, a tour guide showing landmarks of suffering. "Does Emma know? Does Jake?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Derek told them if they tell anyone, they'll get their own special rooms." Emma cried at first, but now she just puts her headphones on really loud. "Jake tried to let me out once, but Derek—" He trailed off, pulling his sleeve down over his hand, a gesture I now recognized as habitual concealment. I made Tommy his favorite lunch, macaroni and cheese with extra cheese, just how he liked it, and watched him eat with the careful precision of a child who'd learned that spills brought consequences. When he finished, I suggested we have quiet time. He curled up on the couch with Mr. Rex, and I put on his favorite cartoon, volume low, letting the familiar sounds of animated adventures fill the silence while I processed what I'd learned. 20 minutes later, Tommy was asleep, his thumb in his mouth, a habit Sarah had said he'd outgrown. I covered him with the soft blanket from the back of the couch and stepped onto the back porch to make a call I never imagined I'd make. "Patricia, I need you to come to Sarah's house. Now. Don't ask questions, just come." My oldest daughter arrived within 15 minutes, her face creased with worry. Patricia was a lawyer, practical and sharp, the one who'd inherited Robert's ability to see through nonsense. I led her to the closet, showed her everything Tommy had shown me, watched her face transform from confusion to horror to rage. "We're calling the police," she said, already pulling out her phone. "Wait." I grabbed her wrist. "I need to talk to Sarah first. I need to understand how this happened." Patricia looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "There's nothing to understand, Mom. This is abuse. This is criminal." But I needed to hear it from Sarah. I needed my daughter to look me in the eye and explain how she'd become someone I didn't recognize. Patricia agreed to wait, but only until Sarah got home. She stationed herself in the living room with Tommy, who'd woken up happy to see his aunt, while I waited in the kitchen. Sarah arrived home at 4:30, Derek's truck pulling in behind her. They walked in together, his hand possessive on her lower back, and I watched my daughter's face carefully. She looked exhausted, defeated, older than her 34 years. "Mom, you're still here. I thought you'd have left by—" "Tommy showed me the closet." The words fell between us like a judge's gavel. Sarah went completely still. Derek's hand tightened on her back, and I saw her wince. A small movement, but telling. "I don't know what he told you," Derek started, his voice smooth as oil, "but kids have wild imaginations." "Shut up." I didn't recognize my own voice. "Sarah, I'm talking to my daughter, alone." Derek laughed, an ugly sound. This is my house too. I pay rent here. With whose money? The question came from Patricia, who'd appeared in the doorway. Because I'd be very interested to know where someone who works part-time construction gets enough to cover rent and still drive a $60,000 truck. His face darkened. Sarah started to cry. "Mom," she whispered, "you don't understand. Tommy is difficult. He's not like Emma and Jake. He needs structure, boundaries. He's 6 years old." The words exploded from me. "He's a baby, Sarah. My God, what happened to you?" "What happened?" Sarah's tears turned to something harder, bitter. "What happened is I'm drowning, Mom. I work 18-hour days. I can barely make rent. His father sends child support when he feels like it. And Tommy never stops. He's always talking, always moving, always needing something. So you lock him in a closet?" "It's not. It's just time out. Derek says. I stepped closer to my daughter, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "Since when do you let anyone tell you how to raise your children? Since when do you choose a man over your baby?" 3 months, Sarah said quietly. "Since Derek found out about Dad's pension, about the money you've been hiding. He said if I helped him, if we could just get you declared incompetent, we could afford a real house, better schools, everything the kids deserve." The room spun. Patricia's hand found my shoulder, steadying me. "You were going to have me declared incompetent? To steal your father's pension?" Sarah couldn't meet my eyes. "Derek knows a doctor who would sign the papers. He said you'd never know, that we'd take care of you, that it was really for everyone's benefit." Patricia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the kitchen for a moment. Then she turned to Sarah with the cold, analytical look she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. "How much?" Patricia's voice was deadly quiet. "How much have you already taken?" Sarah's face crumpled. Just the emergency fund Mom kept here. 20,000. Derek needed it for his gambling debts," Patricia finished. "Right? Let me guess. He told you it was a one-time thing, that some bad men were after him, that once this was paid off, everything would be perfect." Derek stepped forward, his construction boots heavy on the floor. "You don't know anything about. I know everything about you, Derek Mitchell." Patricia pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like court documents. "Arrested twice for domestic violence with your ex-wife in Minnesota. Restraining order from your previous girlfriend in Iowa. And here's the interesting part. Her son, age 5, was removed from the home after teachers reported suspicious bruises and behavioral changes." My legs nearly gave out. I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at Sarah. "You knew? You knew what he was?" "He said she was lying." Sarah's voice pitched higher, desperate. "He said she was crazy, that she made it all up during their custody battle." "And Tommy?" I asked. "Is Tommy lying too? Are those scratch marks on the closet door made up? The urine stains on the floor, the flashlight and crackers he hides, is that all his imagination?" Derek moved toward the hallway, but Patricia blocked him. "The other children, Emma and Jake, what have you done to them?" "Nothing," Sarah insisted. "He hasn't touched them. They're good kids, they listen." "They're terrified," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Emma's headphones, Jake getting into fights at school. They're showing signs too, aren't they? But Tommy's the target because he's the youngest, the most vulnerable, because he reminds you of his father." Sarah's sob was answer enough. Patricia had her phone out, texting rapidly. "Mom, go get Tommy. Take him to the living room. Sarah, sit down and don't move. Derek, if you try to leave, I've already sent your license plate to my contact at the police department." As I stood to get Tommy, Derek grabbed a folder from on top of the refrigerator and threw it on the table. Papers spilled out. Medical forms, financial documents, and what looked like a power of attorney with my forged signature. "Your daughter's been more helpful than you know," Derek sneered. "Margaret Thompson, age 68, showing signs of dementia, confusion, memory loss, giving away money inappropriately. Your own daughter's been documenting your decline for months." I picked up one of the papers. Sarah's handwriting detailed supposed incidents. Mom forgot she was supposed to babysit today. Mom called Robert's name 3 times this week. Mom gave Tommy inappropriate amounts of money. All lies, all carefully dated and witnessed by Derek. Dr. Brennan at the Riverside Clinic has already agreed to evaluate you, Derek continued. 1 appointment, you fail a few tests, and control of your finances transfers to Sarah, for your own protection, of course. Dr. Brennan lost his license in Nebraska, Patricia said, not looking up from her phone. He's not legally allowed to practice in Iowa. Try again. Derek's confident smile faltered. But the plan was bigger than just Mom's money, wasn't it? Patricia continued. Tell me about the house. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Derek found out Mom owns her house outright, worth $400,000 in this market. If she was declared incompetent, we could sell it, put her in a small apartment. Or better yet, Derek added with a sick grin, that nice nursing home on Maple Street, the one where they don't ask too many questions about medication mix-ups. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to dispose of me entirely. The kids' college funds, I said suddenly, remembering. I set up education trusts for all 3 grandchildren. You can't touch those without the trustee's permission, Derek finished, which would be Sarah, once you're declared incompetent. Amazing how cooperative banks become when you have the right paperwork. I made it to my car before the breakdown hit. Patricia had taken charge inside, keeping Derek and Sarah separated while we waited for the police. Tommy was safe with Patricia's husband, who'd arrived to help. I just needed a moment, just needed air, just needed to understand how everything had shattered so completely. Sitting in the driver's seat of the same car I'd driven to Sarah's house twice a week for 2 years, I finally let myself fall apart. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a different memory that now felt tainted, poisoned by what I'd learned. I remembered Sarah at 8 years old standing up to neighborhood, bullies who were tormenting a younger child. It's not fair to hurt someone smaller than you, she'd declared, her small fists clenched. Only bad people do that. When had that fierce protector of the innocent become someone who would let her own baby suffer in darkness? The photo tucked into my sun visor mocked me. Last Christmas, all of us around my dinner table, Sarah laughing at something Robert used to say, Tommy on her lap playing with a new toy truck, Derek's arm around her shoulders. We looked like a normal, happy family. Had the signs been there even then? Had I been so desperate to see Sarah happy again that I'd ignored what was right in front of me? I thought about Robert, grateful for the first time that he wasn't here to see this. He would have blamed himself, would have wondered what we did wrong as parents. We gave her everything, he would have said. Love, stability, values. Where did we fail? But maybe that was the problem. Maybe we'd given her so much that she never learned to handle hardship. When life got difficult after the divorce, instead of fighting through it, she'd chosen the easy path Derek offered, even though it came with such a terrible price. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Police are here. Stay in the car, Mom. You don't need to see this. But I did need to see it. I needed to watch my daughter face the consequences of her choices. Through the window, I saw them leading Derek out in handcuffs, his head high, defiant to the end. Then Sarah, sobbing, stumbling, her scrubs wrinkled and stained with tears. The neighbors had gathered, the same people who'd brought casseroles when Robert died, who'd offered to help with yard work, who'd told me how lucky I was to have such a devoted daughter. Mrs. Chen from across the street caught my eye, her hand over her mouth. She'd mentioned once that she sometimes heard crying at night, but assumed it was just kids being kids. How many people had sensed something wrong but stayed silent? How many chances had we all missed to save Tommy? The hardest memory surfaced last. The day Sarah was born. The nurse had placed her in my arms, this perfect tiny person, and I'd whispered promises to her. I'd protect her, guide her, love her unconditionally. I'd make sure she grew up safe and happy and kind. I'd kept the first two promises, but somewhere along the way, the kindness had curdled into something monstrous. 20 years of teaching had shown me that monsters aren't born. They're made by circumstances and choices, by pressure and fear, and sometimes by the whispered manipulations of other monsters. Derek had found Sarah at her weakest, offered her solutions that required sacrificing her soul piece by piece until she couldn't recognize the woman staring back at her in the mirror. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Not for this. Not when Tommy had scratched until his fingers bled. Not when he'd learned to cry silently so Mommy wouldn't hear. Not when he'd asked if he could live with me because he was good at being small. I grabbed tissues from my glove compartment, wiping my face as Patricia approached the car. Behind her, a social worker was leading Tommy and his siblings to another vehicle. Emma had her arm around Jake, and Tommy clutched Mr. Rex like a lifeline. They looked so small, so lost. "Mom," Patricia said gently through the window, "it's time to go. The kids are coming home with us tonight." I sat in Patricia's kitchen at midnight, surrounded by legal documents and custody paperwork, while the children slept upstairs in hastily prepared guest rooms. The tea in front of me had gone cold hours ago, but I kept my hands wrapped around the mug anyway, needing something solid to anchor me. "You don't have to do this, Mom," Patricia said for the third time. "Frank and I can take them. We have the space, the resources." "They're my grandchildren." The words came out stronger than I felt. Tommy asked to live with me. Even in his worst moments locked in that closet, he believed Grandma's house meant safety. I won't let him down now. Patricia pulled out another folder. "You're 68. The court will question whether you can handle 3 traumatized children. Derek's lawyer, and yes, he's already retained one, will use your age against you. They'll drag up every doctor's appointment, every prescription, every time you've mentioned being tired. Then I'll prove them wrong." Something shifted in my chest, a settling of steel where grief had been moments before. I raised 3 children mostly alone while Robert worked 60-hour weeks. I managed classrooms of 30 third graders for nearly 4 decades. I buried my husband and kept going. They picked the wrong grandmother to mess with. Patricia studied my face, then smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all day. "There she is. There's the Margaret Thompson who made the principal cry that time he tried to cut the music program." "That was different," I protested, but I felt it too. That familiar fire that had gotten me through every challenge life had thrown my way. "No, it's exactly the same. You fought for those kids who weren't even yours. These are your grandchildren, Mom. Your blood." Patricia pulled out her laptop. "Okay, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. First, you need a family law attorney. Not me, I do corporate law. But I know someone. Janet Morrison, best in the state for custody cases. Can I afford her?" "You can't afford not to have her. Besides," Patricia's expression hardened, "we're going to sue Derek for the $20,000 he stole, plus damages. And Sarah—" She paused, pain flickering across her face. "Sarah's going to pay child support from prison." Prison. My daughter was going to prison. I pushed the thought away. I couldn't mourn Sarah's choices right now. 3 children needed me to be stronger than my grief. "What else do I need?" Patricia started typing. "Character witnesses, your teaching colleagues, church members, neighbors. We need everyone who's ever seen you with those kids to write statements. We need to establish that you've been their stable presence throughout this chaos." I thought of all the Tuesdays and Thursdays, all the bedtime stories and scraped knees I'd tended. Mrs. Chen saw me with Tommy every week, and Pastor Williams knows I bring all 3 to Sunday school when Sarah works weekends. Good. We'll also need to document your health. Full physical, cognitive evaluation. Real ones, not Derek's fabricated nonsense. We need to prove you're physically and mentally capable. Patricia glanced up. "When was your last checkup?" 6 months ago. Clean bill of health. Dr. Martinez said I have the constitution of someone 20 years younger." "Perfect. We'll get those records tomorrow." Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard. You'll need to make modifications to your house. Safety locks, possibly converting Robert's old office into a bedroom for Tommy so each child has their own space. I'll do whatever it takes. I stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. I'll sell things if I need to. Take out a loan against the house. Mom, no. Patricia stood too, gripping my shoulders. I'll help with costs. So will James. Even from California, he wants to help. This is what family does. Real family, not whatever twisted version Sarah and Derek created. I pulled my daughter close, feeling her strength flow into me. Patricia had always been my warrior, even as a child. Now she was teaching me to be one too. Those children need more than safety, I said into her shoulder. They need to know they're worth fighting for. The next morning, I woke at 5 with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Patricia's guest room was still dark, but I could hear Tommy whimpering down the hall. Nightmares, the social worker had warned, would be common. I padded to his room, finding him tangled in sheets, crying for a mother who'd betrayed him. Shh, sweetheart. Grandma's here, I whispered, stroking his hair until he settled. As he fell back into peaceful sleep, I made my mental list. They'd tried to destroy my family. Now I would systematically dismantle their entire scheme. First, documentation. I drove home and retrieved my old teaching supplies from the basement, the same organizational tools that had helped me manage hundreds of students over the years. I created 3 binders: evidence, legal strategy, and children's welfare. Then I got to work. I started with my iPhone, downloading every recording app I could find. Patricia had mentioned Iowa was a one-party consent state for recordings. I planned to use that law to my advantage. Every interaction with Sarah, every phone call from Derek's lawyer, every conversation with Child Protective Services would be preserved. Next, I drove back to Sarah's house with a police escort, armed with the emergency custody order Patricia had obtained. While the officer watched, I photographed everything. The closet from every angle, capturing the scratch marks in harsh morning light. The padlock, which I bagged as evidence. Tommy's hidden supplies, each cache carefully documented with notes about location and contents. In Sarah's bedroom, I found more than I'd bargained for. A journal hidden under her mattress like she was still a teenager. The entries started hopeful. Derek helped with Tommy today, and finally feeling like a family again. Then they darkened. Tommy was in the closet for 6 hours. Derek says it's necessary, and I can hear him crying, but Derek says I'm too soft. Most damning was an entry from 2 weeks ago. Mom's getting suspicious. Derek says we need to move faster on the incompetency filing. I hate this, but we need the money. He promises once we're stable, everything will be better for the kids. I photographed every page, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. This wasn't just panic or desperation. This was calculated cruelty with my daughter as a willing participant. At Derek's apartment, which Patricia had discovered through her investigator, we found the mother lode. The police had a warrant based on the forged documents, and I insisted on being present for the search. His computer contained emails to Dr. Brennan discussing payment for my false diagnosis, screenshots of my bank accounts obtained through Sarah, building plans for my house with notes about renovation potential post-sale, but it was the videos that changed everything. Derek had recorded Tommy in the closet, supposedly to show Sarah the boy was manipulative and playing up his distress. Instead, they showed a terrified child begging to use the bathroom, promising to be good, eventually going silent in defeated despair. Detective Morrison, who'd seen everything in his 20-year career, had to step outside after viewing them. "We'll need you to identify the voice on the recordings," he told me, his expression grim. "This is now a federal case. The videos, they cross into territory that brings additional charges." I contacted Janet Morrison, the attorney Patricia had recommended. Within 2 hours, she'd assembled a team that would have intimidated Fortune 500 companies. "We're not just going for custody," she announced at our first meeting. "We're going for complete termination of Sarah's parental rights. criminal prosecution for both of them, and civil damages that will ensure those children never want for anything. She assigned me homework. Create a detailed timeline of every suspicious incident. Compile a list of every person who'd interacted with the children in the last year. And most importantly, record everything going forward. Derek will try to contact you, she warned. He'll try to manipulate, threaten, possibly even apologize. Be ready. I smiled, thinking of the recording app on my phone, the cameras Patricia had installed at my house that morning, the paper trail we were building that would bury them both. Let him try, I said. I'm ready for him now. The custody hearing was set for a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after that horrible discovery. Word had spread through Cedar Rapids like wildfire. The beloved retired teacher, the shocking closet, the mother who chose her boyfriend over her babies. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, but also with familiar faces from my decades of teaching. "We're here for you, Mrs. T," called out Marcus Williams, now 32 and a successful architect, whom I'd taught in 3rd grade. Behind him stood at least a dozen other former students, all grown now, all wearing buttons with my classroom photo and the words, "Teachers Protect Children." Inside the courthouse, the hallway filled with whispers. Sarah sat at a table with her court-appointed attorney, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the woman who used to wear crisp nursing scrubs. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt, her hands cuffed in front of her. Derek sat separately, his attorney, an expensive suit from Des Moines, whispering furiously in his ear. My side of the courtroom filled with witnesses. Mrs. Chen had closed her restaurant for the day to attend. Pastor Williams brought half the church congregation. Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, sat with Tommy's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Patterson, both clutching thick folders of documentation. Patricia had done her work well. 73 character witnesses had submitted affidavits on my behalf. But it was Tommy's foster care report that would seal everything. The social worker had given him art therapy sessions, and his drawings had evolved from dark boxes to something that broke everyone who saw them. A picture of him standing between prison bars, reaching for a grandmother figure on the other side, with the words, "Grandma saves me," written in crayon. Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the evidence with barely concealed disgust. "In my 30 years on the bench," she began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "I have rarely seen such systematic cruelty toward a child, made worse by the fact that it was perpetrated and enabled by his own mother." Sarah sobbed, but the judge continued. "However, we're not just here to discuss criminal matters, which will be handled separately. We're here to determine the best placement for 3 minor children who have survived significant trauma." Derek's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence and would like to address the court about the children's grandmother's fitness." "Your client," the judge interrupted, "is facing 17 federal charges, including child endangerment, imprisonment, and production of child abuse material. He has no standing to question anyone's fitness." The courtroom stirred. Several people gasped at the mention of federal charges. I hadn't known about the additional counts until that moment. Janet Morrison, my attorney, rose elegantly. "Your Honor, we've prepared comprehensive evidence of Mrs. Thompson's fitness as a guardian. However, I believe the most compelling testimony will come from someone who knows her best in that capacity." The doors opened and Tommy walked in, holding Patricia's hand. He wore his best clothes, the outfit I'd bought him for school pictures. His small voice carried surprising strength as he was sworn in for the children's advocate to ask him questions. "Tommy, where do you feel safest?" "With Grandma. She has windows everywhere and no locks on the inside of doors." The advocate nodded gently. "What does Grandma do when you make mistakes?" "She says oops and helps me clean up. She says mistakes are how we learn." "And where would you like to live?" Tommy turned to look directly at Sarah for the first time since entering. "Not with Mommy. She knew about the dark place and didn't save me. Grandmas are supposed to save you. That's what my grandma does." Sarah's lawyer tried to object, but Tommy wasn't finished. Mr. Rex wants to live with Grandma, too, he added solemnly. He says she makes the scared feelings go away. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs and the scratch of the court reporter's keys. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess, but before she could bang her gavel, Derek suddenly stood up, his face twisted with rage. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "That kid is lying. They're all lying. I have proof that the grandmother is senile, that she—" "Mr. Mitchell, control your client," the judge warned his attorney. But Derek wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, waving it wildly. "I have recordings. Sarah telling me how her mother forgets things, loses track of time." "Your Honor," Janet Morrison interrupted smoothly, "if Mr. Mitchell wants to introduce recordings as evidence, we're happy to share ours as well." The judge's eyes narrowed. "What recordings, counselor?" Janet smiled, a predator who'd just cornered her prey. "We've discovered that Mr. Mitchell installed a nanny cam system throughout Sarah Coleman's house, without her knowledge. He's been recording the family for months. We've subpoenaed the cloud storage where these recordings were automatically uploaded." Derek's face went white. His lawyer grabbed his arm, hissing at him to sit down. "Your Honor," Janet continued, "with the court's permission, we'd like to play a selection of these recordings. Mr. Mitchell has just opened the door to this evidence himself." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom screen flickered to life. The first video showed Derek dragging a screaming Tommy to the closet, his large hand completely covering the boy's small arm. "You want to cry? I'll give you something to cry about. Your worthless father cried too, and look where it got him." The second showed Sarah standing outside the closet door at 2 a.m., Tommy's muffled sobs clearly audible. Derek appeared behind her. "Leave him. He needs to learn. Unless you want to join him, I can make that happen, Sarah. You know I can." Sarah's gasp echoed through the courtroom. She clearly hadn't known about the cameras. The third video was the worst. Tommy had wet himself in the closet, and Derek made him clean it up with his special blanket while berating him. "Disgusting little animal. No wonder your daddy didn't want you." But the final recording revealed the twist nobody expected. It showed Derek on the phone, pacing in the garage where he thought he was alone. "Yeah, Mom, the grandmother has more money than we thought. At least $500,000 in assets, maybe more. No, Sarah's easy to control. Desperate single mothers always are. The kids? Once I get power of attorney over the old lady's estate, Sarah can keep them or not, I don't care. Yeah, the doctor will sign anything for $5,000. The boy? He's tough. Thought he'd break easier, but he keeps fighting. Might have to escalate. No, Sarah won't say anything. I've got enough on her now to put her away for years." The courtroom erupted. Derek's elderly mother, who'd been sitting in the back row supposedly supporting her son, tried to flee but was stopped by security. Detective Morrison was already on his phone, calling for additional units. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. You were recording everything? You were using me to get to my mother's money? You said you loved me. You said you wanted to be a father to my children." Derek laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the courthouse walls. "You think I wanted your broken family? Your sniveling kids? You were just the easiest path to the money. Lonely, desperate, already used to being controlled by one man. You practically begged to be manipulated." Sarah lunged across the courtroom, her cuffed hands reaching for Derek. The bailiffs barely restrained her in time. "Order!" Judge Harrison banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order in my courtroom!" But the chaos continued as more revelations poured out. Derek's phone, now in evidence, contained messages to 3 other women in different states, all single mothers with wealthy parents, all in various stages of his manipulation. The FBI agent who'd been observing from the gallery stepped forward, conferring quietly with the judge. Janet Morrison stood calmly in the eye of the storm. "Your Honor, I believe we've established that my client was not only fit to care for her grandchildren, but was actively targeted because of her fitness, her financial stability, her trusting nature, and her love for her family. The real question isn't whether she should have custody, but how quickly we can ensure these children are protected from any future predators who might target this family. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making dinosaur-shaped pancakes while Tommy set the table, carefully placing each napkin in a perfect triangle. The morning sun streamed through the windows in every room, just as Tommy had told the judge. No room in my house would ever be dark enough to frighten a child. "Grandma, Emma says we're having a party today," Tommy said, his voice clear and strong, so different from the whispers of 6 months ago. "That's right, sweetheart. A freedom party." It was the day Sarah's parental rights were officially terminated, and Derek's sentencing was scheduled for that afternoon. 25 years minimum, Janet had told me, with the federal charges and the evidence from multiple states. His mother had been arrested as an accomplice, their multi-state fraud scheme unraveling like a cheap sweater. Sarah got 7 years, eligible for parole in 4 with good behavior. The judge had been lenient, recognizing Derek's manipulation but holding her accountable for her choices. She'd written me a letter last month, pages of apologies and explanations I wasn't ready to read. Patricia kept it in a safety deposit box for when the children were older and could decide for themselves if they wanted contact. The doorbell rang and Tommy ran to answer it, something he never would have done before. "Aunt Patricia! Aunt Patricia! I helped make breakfast!" Patricia swept in with her usual energy, followed by her husband Mark and their teenagers. Behind them came my son James, who'd flown in from California for the occasion. The house that had felt so empty after Robert's death was full again, full of the right kind of chaos, laughter instead of fear, excitement instead of anxiety. Emma emerged from her room, earbuds around her neck, but not in her ears. Progress. At 13, she'd taken on the role of protective big sister with fierce determination. She'd started therapy first, telling the counselor, "I need to be strong for Tommy, but I don't know how to stop being angry." Jake bounded down the stairs, his report card in hand. "Grandma, look, all A's and B's. Coach says if I keep my grades up, I can stay on the basketball team." The rage that had been consuming him had found an outlet in sports and therapy. His counselor said he was processing remarkably well for a child who'd carried such guilt about not being able to protect his little brother. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," I said. Pulling him into a hug, he actually returned. The adoption papers sat on the coffee table, official and final. Margaret Thompson, legal guardian with full parental rights. The kids could have kept Coleman as their last name, but they'd chosen Thompson. "We want your name, Grandma," Emma had said at the lawyer's office. "We want everyone to know we belong to you." The financial settlement had been substantial. Derek's assets, including the truck purchased with my stolen money, were liquidated. Sarah's portion of the house sale went into trust funds for the children's therapy and education. The $20,000 Derek stole was returned with interest and penalties. I'd never have to worry about providing for them. Mrs. Chen arrived with a casserole, Pastor Williams with a cake that read, "Family Forever." My former students streamed in throughout the day, many with their own children, creating an extended family of choice that wrapped around us like armor. Tommy had started sleeping through the night 3 months ago. The closet in the hallway had been removed entirely, the space turned into built-in bookshelves filled with all the stories we read together. Mr. Rex now sat on a shelf of honor in Tommy's room, a real room with windows and nightlights and a door that never, ever locked. As I watched Tommy play with other children from the neighborhood, his laughter genuine and free, I thought about Sarah. Somewhere in a prison cell, she was living her own locked-in consequence. But her children, my children now, they were free. They were safe. They were loved. And that was the only justice that truly mattered. The house was quiet now, the last guests gone home, dishes washed and put away. Emma and Jake were in their rooms, video chatting with friends, normal teenage activities that once seemed impossible. I sat on Tommy's bed, his head in my lap as I stroked his hair, our nightly ritual that had replaced the nightmare of locked closets. "Grandma," he said sleepily, "my teacher asked me to write about my hero today." "Oh? Who did you pick?" "You," he said simply, "but also me, because I was brave enough to show you the closet. Miss Patterson said sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help." I blinked back tears, thinking of all the children who never get to ask, who never have someone to show. "You're the bravest boy I know, sweetheart. And you're the bravest grandma," he murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "You fought the monsters and won." After he fell asleep, I walked through my house, our house, checking on each child one more time. Emma had fallen asleep with her journal open, her latest entry visible. 6 months free, 6 months of being allowed to be a kid again. I love you, Grandma. Jake's basketball was beside his bed, his uniform laid out for tomorrow's game. He'd invited his biological father, who'd started showing up now that Sarah wasn't there to poison their relationship. I made my way to Robert's old chair in the living room, the one I'd almost sold after he died because sitting in it alone hurt too much. Now it was where I read bedtime stories, where children piled on me to watch movies, where Tommy came when the memories got too dark and he needed to remember that love could be safe. The closet that had been a prison was now just shelves of books, hundreds of stories about brave children and loving families, about overcoming darkness and finding light. Sometimes I caught Tommy standing there, running his fingers along the spines, marveling at the transformation. "It's just a regular place now," he'd say with wonder. "The scary is all gone." But I knew the scary wasn't entirely gone. It lived in Tommy's occasional flinches, in Emma's hypervigilance, in Jake's flashes of anger. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey we took together, one day at a time. The therapist said they might always carry scars, but scars could be proof of survival, evidence of strength. I thought about all the warning signs I'd missed or explained away, the flinching, the bruises, the drawings of darkness. How many other grandparents, teachers, neighbors were seeing these signs right now and choosing silence over action? How many children were crying behind closed doors, literal or metaphorical, waiting for someone to notice, to care enough to look closer? The statistics I'd learned during the court proceedings haunted me. 1 in 4 children experience abuse. 70% of children who die from abuse are under age 3. 80% of abuse is perpetrated by parents. These weren't just numbers. They were Tommy's and Emma's and Jake's, waiting for someone to see past the excuses and explanations. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Morrison. "Saw the news coverage of Derek's sentencing. You did the right thing, Margaret. Those children are alive because you acted." Alive. Such a simple word, but Tommy might not have been if I'd waited much longer. The doctor who examined him said the closet imprisonment was escalating, the periods getting longer, the physical abuse increasing. Derek's pattern with his previous victim had ended in tragedy. That child hadn't survived. The thought still woke me at night sometimes. The truth is this: family isn't about DNA or obligation. It's about protection, fierce love, and the courage to make impossible phone calls when a child's safety is at stake. No relationship, no family tie, no fear of judgment is worth more than a child's life and well-being. Love sometimes looks like calling the police on your own daughter. What would you do if you discovered a child you loved was being abused? Would you have the courage to act, even if it meant destroying your family as you knew it? Share your thoughts below, and remember, if you suspect a child is being abused, don't wait for proof. Call your local Child Protective Services or the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-42-4453. You might be the only voice that child has. Be their hero.